David Hood from IT Training. This is a short video demonstrating reading text data into R. An example with an easy spreadsheet, an example with a hard spreadsheet, and an example of reading things into RStudio with the new import options. Now, this spreadsheet has been saved as a CSV file, and this is the easy case. Mostly. We've got one row of headings at the top and a generally solid rectangular block of data. So one row of headings plus a nice rectangle of data normally means it's an easy process. So I've closed the spreadsheet because you can't have it open while importing into R because Excel has it locked. And the first step in R is I am pointing the working directory, the folder that R is paying attention to the place where the spreadsheet is. Once I've done that, I might try a basic read CSV command. And in R, the format is the name of a function and parentheses for what goes into the function. In this case, it's the name of the file in text, and because it's text, there's quote marks about that. So we feed that into the function, I run that, and it dumps a bunch of output to the console. Now, it's not quite what we want. We want to store that result somewhere. So I'm going to do the same thing again, but when it has done that command, it is going to take the results and it's going to follow the arrow and put the results in a new object, a new box called QEX in this case. I run that line and that line runs in console, but it doesn't dump all the results. Instead, over in the environment tab, I've got 134 observations of 20 variables. For QEX, I can have a look at the result and I see, okay, the first line of data does include that second row of headings. I'd kind of like things to start one more line down. So I tweak my line, running basically the same command as before, but this time I've got two things I want to feed into the read CSV folder. At any time, I could go to the help tab in RStudio and I could type in read CSV and see what the help was, and in the various settings I could find settings like skip, number of lines of the data file to skip before beginning to read the data. And in this case I am saying this is the file I want to read in, and skip the first line. So I run that line and I've now got 133 observations of 20 variables. If I have a look at it, it is looking broadly better. The headings are now headings in R. There are a couple that were missing headings, so it's put in X something in those places. I could fix that later. However, when I check the kind of data it is by running a str command, it's a bit of a mix, and some of them are factors. In R, text data is either factor, organized text, or it's a character, disorganized text. And most of the time when you read data in, you may need to do some extra work on the text, so it's better being characters. And in the help settings, there is a setting for should strings be factors. Strings as factors. And I'm going to say strings as factors false, just leave them as characters. So same command as before, read CSV, but now with three settings. Name of the file, how many lines to skip, and keep the text as characters, strings as factor false. I run that. Not much has obviously happened to my data, 133 observations, but when I check the structure now includes characters, which are easier to change and update and things like that. Now an example of a worst case spreadsheet. I've got some data. There's an entirely messy collection of selective headings and partial headings and things that apply to two columns, and it goes on for a number of rows. Further down, there are macrons in the data. It's not ASCII characters from America. We need modern character settings to accommodate New Zealand place names. And this has been saved as a tab delimited text file. So I might initially try reading it in with a read table, reading in a text file command with the name of the file. Basically the same thing as I did before, and I'm storing it in a box called election. I get a whole lot of errors about multi-byte string data, embedded nulls and things like that, which means that the character set, the way of representing the characters, isn't correct. So I need to go off and find out what format that file was saved in. And in this case, I find out it was saved from Excel as Unicode text, and that is a format called UTF-16, which is different to ours own UTF-8 format. So I expressly have to add a setting to reading in the file for this is the kind of file it is. When I do that, and I run that line, I get an error around number of elements. Now that's normally caused by not having the right divider symbols for splitting up the columns. So in this case, I have a look at the file, I find out that it was saved as tab delimited text, and I expressly add a setting of set it to be tab marks for dividing up the columns. I run that line and I get my data read in as election. But once again, if I have a look at it, there are a whole lot of extra lines at the top, which means that it's going to be very confused about that data, and it's going to think that it's columns of text. So I skip the top section and set, once again, strings as factors to false to keep the characters as characters. I run that line, I read it in, and now I've got something that has the data in. It doesn't have the headings. I would need to put in my own headings or otherwise tidy up that aspect, but at least I've got columns in place with temporary headings like V5, V6. Now, as a final third example of reading data in, with recent versions of RStudio, they've changed the import command a little. From the environment tab, I can pick import dataset from CSV. From the file menu, I can pick import dataset from CSV, but it's actually using a helper package called reader. So that reader package needs to be installed on the computer. I pick my CSV file I am reading in, so it's the same one as before. I get a preview of it, and I think that doesn't look very promising. And I start adjusting it. Like, was the first row names? Should I skip a row? And once again, if I start skipping rows, it begins to make more sense. If I skip 5 rows, makes even more sense. And I work with the preview window. I can specify the kind of columns things are in the preview window, which can be very important with dates to specify the right format. And when I am overall happy with the choices, whatever they might be, I click import, brings in that data, and writes in the code for doing so, which I could copy and paste into a script and tidy up any extra marks introduced by putting that in the console. I could also, as a way of moving it in, that involved slightly less tidying up, go to the History tab, check back the last few commands and go put that one in my script in the source document, put that command in my script in the source document, and that puts the commands needed for reading that file into a script I can reuse.